Today's talk is about Edward Burne-Jones. He started life as plain old Ned Jones and finished as Sir Edward Coley Burne-Jones, Baronet. He was lauded throughout Europe as the greatest artist to have emanated from Britain. But he was an outsider for most of his life, and his affair in 1870 created a public scandal that meant for the next 10 years nobody bought his art. But then his fortune changed and he became the leading British artist on the international scene. At his death, his art, in fact, all British art, was out of fashion, fell out of fashion. And it wasn't until the 1990s that his reputation recovered. So how did it all begin? Well, let's start at the beginning. He was born to a Welsh frame maker. His mother died 6 days after he was born, and he was raised by his grieving father. He attended a good grammar school and was accepted by Exeter College, Oxford. And he was one of the few artists, together with William Morris, Frederick Leighton, and Edward Poynter, who went to university. He was quick-witted. He developed intimate friendships with high society women and exchanged up to 5 letters a day. He was very knowledgeable about the Bible, but had little interest in Christianity. He was in fact described as the puck beneath the cowl of a monk. He hated publicity and was given to fits of depression. He's often seen as the last of the Pre-Raphaelites, as he was a few years younger than the other Pre-Raphaelites. He never actually became a member of the Brotherhood, which effectively disbanded in 1855. In 1860, he married Georgiana, or Georgie MacDonald, the sister of one of his old school friends, and they moved into an 18th century house in London. They had 3 children. The eldest, Philip, became a portrait painter. The second, a son, died shortly after birth, and the third, Margaret, married a friend of Morris, who was, in fact, became his biographer. And we can see Philip and Mary in the background of the painting of Georgiana on the left. He was a friend of William Morris. They founded the arts and crafts movement together. But his medieval scenes went out of fashion after his death and he dropped into obscurity. But his reputation has grown since a major exhibition was held at the Barbican in 1989 and is now seen to have been very influential on later artists, including the Symbolists on the continent. In 1857, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, one of the Pre-Raphaelites, won a commission to decorate the inside of Oxford's Union Library. And he asked Burne-Jones, William Morris, Valentine Prinsep, and J.R. Spencer Stanhope to assist. Unfortunately, none of them understood fresco technique, and the oil paint they used was peeling from the walls before they'd even finished. The influential art critic John Ruskin described them all the least bit crazy and very difficult to manage. You can see here the fresco is in very poor condition today. Its restoration's been attempted, and during the day the light from the skylights renders them virtually invisible. In 1859, Burne-Jones, made his first trip to Italy and fell in love with the Sienese school. Still influenced by Rossetti, he created this work in 1860 of Sidonia van Bork and Clara van Bork. Now, they are characters in Wilhelm Meinhold's Gothic romance Sidonia and the Sorceress, which was translated by Oscar Wilde's mother, Lady Wilde, and published in 1849, and tells of the evil crimes of Sidonia, whose beauty entraps everyone she sees. She bewitches the whole of the ruling house of Pomerania and either kills her victims or renders them impotent. And the story ends when she's burnt as a witch at the age of 80. The details of this painting are taken from the novel, but the costume is based on this painting by Giulio Romano, portrait of Margherita Paleologo at the time of her marriage to Federico Gonzaga, the first Duke of Mantua. It's in the Royal Collection. And in fact, we know it was seen by Burne-Jones and the Rossettis when they visited Hampton Court together. The painting is part of their lifelong interest in the femme fatale and witches, and they were shockingly encouraged by the esoteric tales of their friends like Swinburne and Simeon Solomon. This is a femme fatale painted by Rossetti in the same manner as Burne-Jones. A different and perhaps more typical example of Burne-Jones' work is the Merciful Night. Painted in 1863, and the following year he was elected a member of the Society of Painters in Watercolours. This work, although it looks like oils, is in watercolour. And he painted many fine watercolours over the next 6 years. What's going on here is it's showing a miracle that is said to have happened to a Florentine knight after he had spared the life of his brother's murderer. And according to this legend, as the knight was praying at a wayside shrine, the wooden figure of Christ bowed down from his cross and embraced the knight as a reward for his act of forgiveness or mercy. Despite the fact that The Merciful Night was based on a story that was appealing to many Victorians, it wasn't received well by all the critics. Reviewers found they fought with the way Burne-Jones presented it. The Art Journal described it as absolutely abhorrent. The Spectator condemned its affectation of ungainliness and grimace, and the Times complained that Mr. Jones dwells and works in the 14th and 15th centuries. His figures are queerly drawn, stand in contorted attitude, and show neither bone, muscle, nor curvature of flesh under their robes, while the accessories display utter contempt for keeping or probability. From the 1860s, Burne-Jones broke away from presenting pictures with a moral story and became one of the early artists of what's called the aesthetic movement. And in fact, because of that, he broke with John Ruskin, the Victorian art critic, and the early Pre-Raphaelite connections that he had. He wrote to a friend, "I mean by a picture a beautiful romantic dream of something that never was, never will be, in a light better than any light that ever shone, in a land no one can define or remember, only desire." So his personal dream world of beauty, his rejection of scientific facts, all conflicted with the science and technology of the day, the Industrial Revolution, and he was criticized for that. The aesthetic movement, group of artists that believed in producing art for art's sake rather than using art to make a moral or political point. And it's been linked to symbolism on the continent. Despite its poor reception, this painting and others did attract some important patrons, and it won him the appreciation of an even younger generation who later became his devoted followers. One of them, Walter Crane, remembered the effect Burne-Jones' work had on him. He said, "The curtain had been lifted and we had a glimpse into a magic world of romance and pictured poetry, a twilight of dark, mysterious woodlands, haunted streams, meads of deep green, starred with burning flowers, veiled in a dim and mystic light." A good description of a lot of Burne-Jones' work. But he also did other things as well. This is the Morris room in the Victorian Albert Museum, one of the first, in fact, I think the first museum to have a cafe, and this is one of the rooms of the cafe. In 1861, William Morris had founded Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Co. with Rossetti, Burne-Jones, and others. And the firm received positive reviews for the work they did, and they were awarded a contract to decorate the dining room at what was then called the South Kensington Museum, now the Victorian Albert Museum. The stained glass windows were designed by Burne-Jones, and the decoration and ceiling by William Morris, and the architect for the room was Philip Webb. In 1871, 10 years after the firm was founded, it was reorganized as Morris & Co. and became owned by William Morris. Burne-Jones continued to do work for him and designing stained glass windows and tapestries for the rest of his life. And he also worked as an illustrator and designed books for Morris's Kelmscott Press. But today I'm going to be concentrating more on Burne-Jones's painting. In 1866, Mrs. Ephrosyne Cassavetti commissioned Burne-Jones to paint her daughter, Maria Zambuco. This painting, Cupid Finding Psyche, sometimes it's called Portrait of Maria Zambuco, led to them meeting, led eventually to an affair which ended in tragedy, or at least public scandal. Now, Maria Zambuco was a British artist, a model of Greek descent, favoured as a model by the Pre-Raphaelites, although she was the daughter of a very wealthy Greek merchant. And also Maria and her cousins were very well known in society. Another one, Marie Spartelli-Stillman, became an artist. They were known as the Three Graces after the charities of Greek mythology. And in 1858, her father died and she inherited her father's vast fortune. So she was able to lead a more independent life and was known, scandalously, to go unchaperoned while still unmarried. She dedicated herself to art, studied at the Slade School, and then travelled and studied in the studio of Auguste Rodin in Paris, and worked as a sculptor in the 1880s, exhibited at the Royal Academy and at the Arts and Crafts exhibition in London, as well as the Paris Salon. In 1860, her first admirer, Georges du Maurier, called her rude and unapproachable, but of great talent and a really wonderful beauty. Her name, Zambuco, is because she married a Dr. Zambuco in 1860, lived with him in France. They had a son and a daughter, but the marriage wasn't a success, and she moved back to live with her mother in London, which is when she met Burne-Jones. They had an affair which lasted at least till 1869, some say 1872, and they stayed in contact after that. And in 1869, Edward Burne-Jones attempted to leave his wife for her, and it caused a public scandal. It wasn't scandalous to have a mistress as long as it didn't become public knowledge. But what happened was they met in what's called Little Venice in West London, and she entreated him to commit suicide with her by taking a laudanum overdose by the canal side there. And the public became aware. They tried to stop them. He refused. The police had to be called. They ran off together, but he was taken ill at Dover en route to France, and he returned to his wife, Georgiana. After they broke up, she continued to appear in his paintings, but typically as a sorceress or temptress, such as The Beguiling of Merlin, which we'll see later, and the controversial Phyllis and Demophoon. A lot of their friends cut Maria socially, and a lot of his patrons refused to buy his work. So from that point on, from the time this scandal developed, for the next 10 years, he was a pariah in society. What I'm doing here is showing you 8 works called Pygmalion, 2 series. The first series of started in 1868 at the top, and then some years later he produced a series at the bottom, and you can see the change in his style. The series at the top is privately owned by Lloyd Webber, and the series at the bottom is in the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. It was commissioned by Mrs. Cassavetti, and it's the story of Pygmalion, which comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Pygmalion, the sculptor, decides to live a celibate life and is appalled by the way debauched women live their lives, which is why he chooses a celibate life. And he dreams of an ideal partner and starts to carve a figure in stone, and he falls in love with the statue, and that brings it to life. And the story was the inspiration for George Bernard Shaw play Pygmalion, and later the musical and film My Fair Lady. So the first series, the one at the top, was when Burne-Jones was having an affair with Maria Zambuco. And although Burne-Jones thought he already had the perfect woman in his wife, Georgiana, he was unable to prevent himself from longing for his model and muse, Maria, and this led to a violent internal conflict. We see here in the second series, produced some 9 years later, the human forms in the picture were said to be such that, and this is a quote, "Every man who respects his manhood and every woman who values her honour must regard with disgust." So that's the way that they were regarded by a lot of the critics at the time, as going too far. And one of the reasons, remember all the critics were male, one of the reasons John Ruskin wrote that the figures lacked virility, And this was an ongoing criticism of Burne-Jones's figures, male and female. Of effeminacy, which in the Victorian period was regarded as a very serious criticism. A man was expected to be macho and manly. And what Burne-Jones often does is that his male figures are womanly, and often his female figures have manly elements. That his figures are transgender, as we'd now say. Some praised his work. Rudyard Kipling was a supporter both of Burne-Jones as a man and also of his work. This is the work that I mentioned earlier, 1870, Phyllis and Demophoon. It led to Burne-Jones resigning his membership of the Old Watercolour Society. What happened was that this work, when submitted to the society, the members could recognize the features of his lover, Maria Zambuco, and they objected to the exposed genitals of Demophoon. Combined with what they saw as the suggestive female sexual assertiveness were all too much for Victorian sensibilities, and they asked him to change the work. He refused and in fact resigned his membership of the society. Incidentally, in the story, Phyllis was Queen of Thrace. She fell in love with Demophoon, and he fell in love with her, but had business to attend to, promised to return, and he was away for months and months and months. And when he failed to return, he returned eventually in 6 months, but before he returned, she hanged herself, and she was turned into an almond tree by the gods. And when he returned, she emerges from the tree to forgive him. And so this slightly strange position that she's in is because she is a tree becoming a person. Now, 12 years later, Burne-Jones reworked the painting. He covered Demophoon's genitals, but as you can see, exposed Phyllis. It was exhibited at the Grosvenor Gallery and quickly purchased, and it caused no controversy at this time, perhaps because of the wisp of drapery. Originally, it was a sort of a scarf he intended to wrap around Phyllis, but he later removed it from her. Not everyone liked it. The Times still found the picture a strange one, its effect repellent in the extreme, and the Art Journal found the pose and musculature exaggerated and thought the composition had an air of strained and unnatural action which greatly mars its effect. I mean, I suppose a woman emerging from a tree is bound to create some strain, and it's very difficult for an artist to show that happening in a naturalistic way. Incidentally, all the critics praised the excellence of the almond blossom and the colour harmonies. In 1866, Burne-Jones's friend, the poet Algernon Charles Swinburne, published a poem called Las Veneris in praise of Venus. And the poem is based on the theme of Tannhauser. And in that story, there's a young knight called Tannhauser who falls in love with Venus and lives with her until he becomes filled with remorse. He escapes, goes to Rome to ask the Pope's forgiveness. The Pope tells him that it's impossible to forgive him, as impossible as if his papal staff blossomed. So Tannhauser left and returned to Vienna, and unknown to Tannhauser, 3 days later, the Pope's staff blossoms, but Tannhauser never gets to hear of this miracle and spends his life damned. And so the poem is about Tannhauser's enslavement to physical love and his addiction to sexual love and sensuality. And the idea is the danger, again, femme fatale, Venus, dangerous beauty. The implication is that men face the danger of being seduced and enslaved by beautiful women. Not that the men have anything to do with it, of course. The theme must have resonated with Burne-Jones because he was having an affair with Maria Zambuco, and the affair which meant that it was a terrible period for Jones, and that this painting suggests, and his reference to Tannhauser suggests, that perhaps he felt that it wasn't his fault at all, which of course it was. He was being seduced by Maria Zambuco. She, at this time as well, his wife, the long-suffering Georgiana, developed a close relationship with William Morris, whose wife, Jane, had fallen in love with Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Now, the Burne-Joneses remained married and continued their close relationship for the rest of their lives. And this is a photograph of some of them, the William Morris and Burne-Jones families. It was taken in 1874 and documents this complex set of relationships. It's taken at the back garden of Burne-Jones's house in Fulham. Burne-Jones's father is on the left, William Morris on the right of the family group on the left, and he's sitting with his two children, Margaret and Philip, and his wife, Georgiana. She's the one in the centre. Let me label them to make it clearer. So this is Georgiana. And then on the right, there's the family of William Morris, May Morris, Jane Morris's wife here, and Jenny Morris, his other daughter. And as I said, Georgiana had developed a close relationship with William Morris, and William Morris's wife Jane had fallen in love with Dante Gabriel Rossetti. In fact, the affair between Burne-Jones and Maria Zambuco continued on and off for years. I said Georgiana was long suffering. Let me just quote a letter she wrote to a friend. "Dearest Rosalind, be hard on no one in this matter and exalt no one, and may we all come through it at last. I know one thing, and that is there is enough love between me and Edward to last out a long life if it is given to us." And this is another example of, if you read his personal relationships into this painting, the view he had of his relationship with Maria Zambuco. The beguiling of Merlin. She continues to appear in his paintings as a sorceress or temptress, as she is here. In the beguiling of Merlin, the sorceress Nimue beguiles Merlin, as you see here. It's part of the story of the Arthurian legend, where Merlin becomes infatuated with Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, and is shown here trapped helpless in a hawthorn bush as she reads from a book of spells. So if we do project, if Burne-Jones did project himself into the role of Merlin and Maria Zambuco into the role of Nimue, then you can see he's suggesting that he was seduced by the wiles of a temptress, rather than, of course, with what he was, an adult making a decision about his life. This is an interesting painting because it's, I suppose, it should best be regarded as a painting of the aesthetic movement. It's a vague and mysterious painting. It's got no particular meaning, we think. It incorporates styles from other artists of the aesthetic movement from the Renaissance. There are three women on the left wearing simple Renaissance style dresses, dancing in a garden on a summer evening. On the right, there's a musician of indiscernible gender standing under a loggia, a mill pond behind the women, and on the other side of the pond there are several nude men, presumably undressed to go swimming, and which incidentally at this stage men would do on the beach. They would often swim naked in the presence of women. In the background is an unspecific landscape consisting of various designs and different types of architecture. Incidentally, the women, the three women dancing, are modelled on the women I described earlier as the three graces, and Maria Zambuco is the one on the right. Maria Stillman, the artist, is the one in the middle. This is the Golden Stairs, a painting at the Tate. It epitomizes his interest in evoking a mood rather than telling a story. It's deliberately enigmatic. The meaning has provoked much debate, although likely there isn't a meaning, it's just evoking a mood. Some people think the 18 women shown here are spirits in a dream world. It might be purely decorative and convey a feeling of endless movement. The other suggestion that's been made by the art critic Walter Pater is that all art constantly aspires to the condition of music, and so this could be seen as almost notes on a stave. It's something that suggests a mood as music does, rather than have any specific meaning in the real world. It was designed originally in 1872. He began the canvas in 1876 and it was exhibited in 1880. He had to actually rush to finish it on time. The bodies were all studied from various models, some of them professional models, some of them women in his family or friends. His daughter, Margaret, is the one at the top in profile. William Morris's daughter, May, faces us 2/3 of the way down. The daughter of another of his patrons, Francis Graham, is at the bottom holding symbols. Behind her is a close friend, Mary Gladstone, daughter of the leader of the Liberal Party, Gladstone. And then there's a lot of other famous women of the period, including Lady Lovelace and a famous actress. Ironically, after all this trouble he had finding models and representing them accurately, most of the critics complained that all the heads looked alike, as if they were all from the same model. I just thought I would show you one of his many stained glass windows. He had a contract with Powell Glassworks to, or Rossetti had the contract and introduced Burne-Jones, who arranged a contract with them and began his work as a stained glass artist. He was with them for between 1857 and 1861 until Morris formed the company, Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Co. And then it was Morris who employed him to design stained glass, decorate rooms and furniture in what was known as the Gothic Revival style. And in fact, Burne-Jones became the Morris and Co.'s principal designer of stained glass and produced more than 500 individual figures, subjects. But I'll stay with the painting. This is one of his best known works, and in fact, one of his particular favourites. It's called The Wheel of Fortune. It's always been considered one of his most powerful and successful compositions. It's now in the Musée d'Orsay. It raises questions about progress, or more accurately, I suppose, a denial of progress. And progress was a byword of Victorian Britain. Everyone saw that they were living at a time in Britain of great progress, growth of the empire, enormous number of technical developments, scientific discoveries. Everyone believed in an unending future of continual progress. But Burne-Jones was completely anti-science. And this painting could be seen of his view of life. The three male figures are a slave, a king, and a poet, and all three are being treated alike by the wheel of fortune. Anyone can rise and anyone can fall at any time for unexpected and unpredictable reasons. Many critics at the time didn't like it, regarded it as degenerate. The Illustrated London News described it with disgust. They thought the figures were morbid, weak, with an overwrought physique, and again described as effeminate. This criticism haunted him throughout his artistic career, and as I said, in Victorian England it was a damning criticism. This is the painting. King Cophetua and the Beggar Maid. This is the painting that reinstated his career 10 years after or slightly more than 10 years after the scandalous affair he had with Maria Zambuco. And this painting established him as a famous international artist. It was exhibited at the Grosvenor Gallery, and it became his greatest success of the whole of the 1880s. People admired its technical execution, but it was its theme. The theme, as it was seen at the time, was power and wealth being overcome by beauty and simplicity. It tells the story of how Prince Cophetua fell in love with the beggar Penelophon, and despite his power and wealth, he's so hopelessly in love before the beauty of this poor innocent beggar maid that his power and his wealth count for nothing. I think we might interpret this painting in a different way today, but that's the way it was seen at the time. It was described, or it became Picture of the Year by the Art Journal, and the Times, often a critic of Burne-Jones, described it as not only the finest work Mr. Burne-Jones has ever painted, but one of the finest pictures ever painted by an Englishman. It was exhibited in France a few years later, and so popular did it become that it earned him the Légion d'honneur and started a vogue on the continent for his work. And it was during the late 1880s and 1890s international reputation reached its highest point, and it was an influence on the French symbolists. He lived long enough, he died in 1898, to see his reputation starting to fade in the last few years of his life. But before then, this was a popular work, The Depths of the Sea. A young man is being pulled by a smiling mermaid down into the sea, and we can interpret this as a drowned person being pulled down, or a person being pulled down and drowned by the mermaid. Burne-Jones has said he intended this to be suggestive and indefinite, so it's open to any interpretation. It could be the mermaid as an example again of the femme fatale. Burne-Jones was so wanted to paint the underwater figures accurately that he actually borrowed a tank from a friend and filled it with tinted water to paint this. There's also, as there are for many of his paintings, beautiful study drawings that can be seen in many galleries. Burne-Jones said to a friend, "I'm painting a scene in Laura's, a friend of his, previous existence." Laura Littleton, was a young beauty, and she was known as a heartbreaker. In fact, Georgiana Burne-Jones wrote of her, "Laura, the daughter of Sir Charles Tennant, in our house, she so fascinated us all that we called her the Siren." This is one of the drawings that he produced, a study drawing for the mermaid in the picture. This is part of a series called the Perseus cycle in the 1880s. Based on Greek myth, essentially it's the story of how a knight-errant triumphs over evil. Perseus, the son of the god Zeus, is sent to rescue the beautiful Andromeda and kill the Gorgon Medusa. And Burne-Jones produced a series of large oil paintings which were commissioned for the London home of the British statesman and arts patron Arthur Balfour. He worked on the series for 10 years, but never completed all the paintings, partly because of ill health. We're in the 1880s now, and he was receiving many honours, and it was not until 1885 that he started hyphenating his name to distinguish himself from all the other Joneses. So up to then he'd been Edward Jones, but from 1885 he became Edward Burne-Jones. And that was the year 1885 he was elected as an associate of the Royal Academy and exhibited for the only time at the Academy, showing The Depths of the Sea, the one we've just seen. And he resigned his associateship in 1893. Another painting in the series, the Perseus cycle, and now in the Southampton Art Gallery, is called The Doom Fulfilled, and it shows Perseus freeing Andromeda by doing battle with this serpentine sea serpent. It's sort of shown as I don't know what, a giant anaconda, and interestingly, the sea serpent is shown the same colour of Perseus's armour. I don't know whether he's indicating that both are monsters fighting for ownership of Andromeda. There are different versions. In one version, he slays the monster by driving a sword into its back. In another, by showing it the head of Medusa. Andromeda looks quite, she's been freed from the chains and for some reason is still standing there looking apparently calmly on at the scene of the fight between the two of them. Now this is called the baleful head, and in the story, to convince Andromeda that he is in fact the son of the king of the gods, Zeus, so he can claim her hand in marriage because she was a princess, what he does is he shows her Medusa's head, but of course you can't look at the head directly, otherwise you'd be turned into stone, but you can look at its reflection. So he's showing the head as a reflection in the water of this pool. When it was shown at the Grosvenor Gallery, a critic found it strikingly in harmony. The poetry of the design was in harmony with the subject, and judged the painting would no doubt take a place inferior only to King Cophetua and The Golden Stairs, two works we've already seen. Coming towards the end of his life, this is the legend of the Briar Rose, and it depicts a moment in the story of Sleeping Beauty. I'll show you the other works in the series in a moment, but I thought I'd show you this in close-up. The story, as Burne-Jones tells it, comes from the story as presented by the brothers Grimm in their 1812 collection. And in this picture, it shows the knight discovering sleeping soldiers, and in their slumber, they've been completely entwined by the barbed thorns of the briar rose. And beneath each of the panels that he painted, there's an inscription of a poem written by William Morris called The Briar Wood, which reads, and I'll just give you a few lines from the poem: "The fateful slumber floats and flows about the tangle of the rose, but lo, the fated hand and heart to rend the slumberous curse apart." This is from the second series, and the paintings are all at Buscott Park in Oxfordshire. It won him wide acclaim and wide admiration, and it was about this time that the illness stopped him working on occasions and interrupted his work, and we'll see his last work in a moment. By the way, he was made a baronet in 1894, died in 1898. His socialist friends, like William Morris, were annoyed by him accepting the baronetcy, but it was appreciated by his son Philip, who'd failed his degree at Oxford and was trying to break into high society. So his father being a baronet was something that would help his career. These are the three other works from the Briar Rose series, and these four works are at Buscott Park, as I said. There's the council chamber at the top showing the members of the council asleep, as well as the king asleep on his throne, and you can see other soldiers asleep through the window. The second one, the garden court, shows weavers have fallen asleep at their loom, with the castle in the background. And the final one shows Sleeping Beauty herself surrounded by her slumbering attendants. Just two more works. This is one of his best known works, Love Among the Ruins. A couple are seated amongst ruins, as you can see. There's a column covered in briar rose at their feet. At the left, there's a door decorated with a frieze of putty with a courtyard beyond. He first painted it in watercolour. The title is from a poem by Robert Browning of 1855, but the lovelorn mood is taken from, I believe, Burne-Jones' own life. And the woman is inspired again by his former mistress, the Greek heiress, Maria Zambuco. He painted this 5-foot watercolour after the affair was over, but she would haunt him for the rest of his life. And this painting became one of his most admired and most exhibited works before it was damaged after being sent to the Société Nationale de Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1893. And then finally, the work on which he spent the longest time, 1881 to 1898, The Last Sleep of Arthur in Avalon, considered by some to be his last and greatest work. It's certainly epic. Look at the size of it. It's 6.5 meters long. It was commissioned by the Earl of Carlisle to hang on the wall in his library. And he started it in 1881 and worked on it for some 17 years. During this period, many of his friends died, and he felt more and more isolated, more and more aware of his own mortality. And he was devastated in 1896 by the death of his lifelong friend, William Morris. He fell in love with the work, he immersed himself in the work, he identified himself with Arthur, and he wrote, above all, the picture is about silence. Towards the end of his life, he wrote, I need nothing but my hands and my brain to fashion myself a world to live in that nothing can disturb. In my own land, I am king of it. In fact, the day before he died, he was still working on this painting. I'll just tell you an amusing story to end with. It was loaned to the Tate in 1929. And of course, the war started in 1939. And when it did, it was removed from its stretcher, rolled up and stored in a box. And it wasn't until 1963 the owners decided to sell it through Christie's. And at Christie's, the famous British art critic Brian Sewell was working. And it was delivered to Christie's only a week before the sale. When they removed it from the box, there were 24 years of spiders and detritus fell out. They tried to unroll the heavy canvas, but it was difficult to unroll because it had been rolled for 24 years. So what they did is they tacked it to a tapestry bar and slowly lifted the bar up to the ceiling to let the work slowly unroll as they lifted it. Then what happened is that Christie's chairman, Peter Chance, arrived. And as he reached the centre of the canvas to look at it closely, it began to tear away from the bar holding it up. Now, the chairman, Peter Chance, was a short man, and this canvas started to rapidly curl around him. It surrounded him, and in fact, it enclosed him. He fought his way out, damaging the canvas. Some people say that the person trapped in the canvas was Brian Sewell, but this story arises from Brian Sewell, so I don't know whether he was writing himself out as the person who was surrounded, or whether it was actually the chairman. It's a good story either way. And incidentally, the canvas should never be rolled face in, but that's what happened as it fell, and the floor was covered in paint flakes, and the painting was extensively damaged. So Brian Sewell called a friend, Joan Seddon, who was a restorer, and they both worked on the painting for 30 hours from Friday to Monday morning, repainting the flowers. They said nothing. It was sold to the founder of the Ponce Museum of Art in Puerto Rico. Burne-Jones was out of favour at the time, so there was no objection to its export. The museum there relined it, cleaned it and stretched it. And when it was being refurbished in 2009, when the museum was being redecorated, they loaned it to the Tate. So it came back to the Tate together with Frederick Leighton's Flaming June. And Brian Sewell saw the painting for the first time in 45 years and was appalled by the quality of the irises, the bluebells, the forget-me-nots. But he couldn't tell if they were the flowers that he had painted whether they'd been painted by the restorers at the museum, or in fact by one of Burne-Jones's assistants, or even by Burne-Jones himself. As I said, during the Edwardian period, Burne-Jones became completely out of fashion in the art world. And on the 100th anniversary of his birth in 1933, it was a very sad affair. No one came. It was very poorly attended. But in the mid-1970s, his work started to be reassessed. A biography was published. Major exhibitions were held at the Barbican, at the Tate, in Birmingham, Museum of Modern Art in New York, at Musée d'Orsay in Paris. And although his work, or maybe because his work is so essentially Victorian, it's now seen as an important stepping stone to 20th century art in terms of its symbolism, psychology, and sexual insights. So I end with a painting that I think tells us a lot about his life, otherworldly. It's a Greek legend. He lived in a world of myths and legends, and that, of course, the real world kept intruding on his life. His affair with Maria Zambuco is the model for Phyllis here. We now see him as a stepping stone from Romanticism to Symbolism, and then on into a time that he never lived to see and probably would never have understood, the earliest 20th century, with its cubism, fauvism, and abstraction. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye for now.